Thank you, Jean-Michel. The next presentation is also concerning pre-exposure prophylaxis, but a different route altogether. And Rafi Landowitz of the University of California, Los Angeles, is here to report the first results from HPTN 077, a phase 2A trial of long-acting injectable PrEP. Over to you, Rafi.
So thank you, Linda, Gail, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's a privilege to be here, be able to talk to you about HPTN 077. As many of you are aware, TDF FTC-based PrEP works extremely well when taken as prescribed, either in a daily or an on-demand setting, but adherence sufficient to achieve protection is extremely challenging for some populations, and we've seen that in a number of randomized trials. Cabotegravir is a novel integrase inhibitor that's under development both for HIV treatment, as we heard yesterday with the 96-week results of the LATTE-2 study in combination with other long-acting agents, and also for HIV prevention in diverse populations. Previously, the ViiV-sponsored ECLAIR study, which was a phase 2A study in US-based males, suggested that the original dose that was being studied for prevention, which was 800 milligrams of long-acting injectable cabotegravir administered every 3 months, did not meet pharmacokinetic targets that, based on macaque models, would be expected to provide protection. So based on that, we studied not only 800 milligrams in males and females, but we used a model dose of 600 milligrams administered at a shorter interval of every 8 weeks in both males and females globally. So HPTN 077 was designed, it's also a phase 2A study, to evaluate the safety, tolerability, acceptability, and the pharmacokinetics of long-acting injectable cabotegravir. We enrolled 199 males and females who were at low risk for getting HIV at sites in Brazil, the United States, Malawi, and South Africa. Our study participants received cabotegravir or a matching saline placebo, first as pills and then as injections. It was randomized 3-to-1 active to placebo. And we enrolled these two cohorts that I mentioned. The first cohort had 110 participants receiving the 800 milligram dose, which is administered as 2 split 2 milliliter injections administered at each injection time point for 3 injections. And then the second cohort administered 600 milligrams of cabotegravir, which is a single 3 milliliter injection of cabotegravir at each injection time point, or a matching placebo. And that was done at every 8-week time points after an initial 4-week load. So the first 2 injections were separated by 4 weeks, and everything thereafter was separated by 8 weeks. The primary analysis was 41 weeks after study entry, so after an oral lead-in to establish safety and tolerability, and then 3 injections in the first cohort or 5 in the second. And then all the participants were followed initially for 52 weeks after their final injection, when we got some additional information from the ECLAIR study that suggested that 17% of cabotegravir exposed participants in the ECLAIR study still had detectable levels of cabotegravir 1 year after their final injection. We extended the follow-up of all the participants in 077 who hadn't already completed study when that information became available to be 76 weeks, so 18 months after their final injection. What we find in the primary analysis is that the 800 milligram dose did not consistently meet pharmacokinetic targets that, based on the non-human primate models, would be expected to provide protection, but the 600 milligram every 8 weeks with that 4-week initial load did for both males and females. The safety was excellent in both cohorts. There was a high rate of injection site reactions with both dose schemas. 92% of people in the 800 milligram every 12-week cohort had some injection site reaction during the course of the study, and 88% of the second cohort, the 600 milligram dose, had some injection site reaction. The overwhelming majority were mild to moderate. We only had one participant out of 134 exposed to active cabotegravir who had to discontinue injections because of an injection site-related event. In summary, these data are extremely supportive of moving forward into phase 3 efficacy studies in at-risk individuals with the 600 milligram every 8-week dose, as is currently being planned in the 083, which is in the field, and 084 studies, which is currently in development.
Great. Thank you, Rafi. Our next speaker is Aisha Karsani of the Centre for AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, better known as CAPRISA to many of you. You will all be aware that the advantages of medical male circumcision to protect the male partner of a discordant relationship. What is interesting here and what Aisha will be presenting to us is the protection against HIV and several sexually transmitted infections amongst the female partners of circumcised men. Aisha.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you to the audience for being here. So I'm going to present our new research findings, and these are findings that suggest that male circumcision being done to protect men from HIV is also protecting women against HIV and herpes simplex virus type 2. Our primary study, which is the HIV Incidence Provincial Surveillance System, was established to assess the population-level HIV prevalence and incidence in association with the scale-up of prevention efforts in a real-world non-trial setting. Our study was conducted between June 2014 and June 2015, and we enrolled 9,812 participants, 6,265 were females, and 3,547 were males. From this survey, we analyzed the sexual histories and sexually transmitted infection test results from nearly 5,000 randomly selected women in Vulindlela and the Greater Edendale area, which is in KwaZulu-Natal province, South Africa. Those who reported that their most recent male sexual partner was circumcised were 22% less likely to have HIV and 15% less likely to have genital herpes, which is herpes simplex virus type 2 infection, than those whose most recent partner was not circumcised. Male circumcision has been known for over a decade to protect men from HIV and some sexually transmitted infections. To make this protection widely available in countries heavily affected by HIV, voluntary medical male circumcision programs in South Africa and other sub-Saharan countries have circumcised nearly 12 million men to date, including the 32% of the men who were circumcised in the study area. Before VMCC programs were developed, some studies also suggested that male circumcision might pass on some protection from sexually transmitted infections to women. But HIPS is the first real-world study done in a VMCC program area to test whether this protection is actually taking place. It also confirms the earlier findings from the Orange Farm, South Africa, that women with circumcised partners are partially protected from acquiring HIV. The effect may be seen because with fewer men infected, women will have less exposure. Or it may also be that men with some sexually transmitted infections are less likely to pass on if they are circumcised. Not only is HIV life-threatening infection, life-altering infection for women, which can be passed to their children, but genital herpes can also infect infants at birth with devastating consequences, including permanent brain damage and death. Both were very common in the study area, with 69% of women being infected with genital herpes and 44% with HIV. In areas like these, findings suggest that the effects of VMCC program are relevant not only for HIV prevention in men, but for HIV and herpes prevention in the broader community. However, circumcision status of the most recent partner does not completely describe a woman's exposure over her lifetime, and this early data cannot determine when women became infected. The HIP study will continue to follow some of these women over time to collect data on the acquisition of these and other sexually transmitted infections and their sexual partners at the time of infection. This will provide a better understanding of how VMCC affects women's risk for these diseases. What is certain, however, is that having a circumcised partner can provide women with partial protection against HIV and sexually transmitted infections, and was not shown to provide protection against all other types of STIs. So this afternoon, Dr. Carlos Toledo, a senior co-investigator on the project, will be presenting the more detailed findings on this paper. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aisha. We now turn to the subject of treatment as prevention. So in my mind, I think about primary prevention where the tool is used to protect the individual, treatment as prevention where because the infecting partner may be on treatment and virally suppressed, that protects the partner. And we're joined by Andrew Grulich of the University of New South Wales in Australia. He will today be announcing the results of a really lovely study that provides striking new evidence on the association of viral suppression and HIV transmission among serodiscordant gay male couples. Andrew.
Thank you, Linda Gale. And I really have great pleasure in presenting these results today on behalf of my colleagues in Australia, in Rio de Janeiro and in Bangkok, Thailand. So the Opposites Attract study was an observational cohort study where we recruited 343 serodiscordant gay male couples, so that's couples where one's HIV positive and one's HIV negative, and we followed them up for over a year and a half on average per couple. And today we're releasing the final results on the relationship between HIV treatment and having undetectable viral load with the risk of transmission of HIV to the negative partner. The essential important finding is that there were zero linked HIV transmissions within these couples. No HIV negative partner contracted HIV from his HIV positive partner despite nearly 600 couple years of follow-up with 17,000 reported acts of condomless anal sex within the couples, of which over 12,000 were protected only by undetectable viral load. There were other acts that were also protected by PrEP, because the reality of Opposites Attract is that it was occurring in a time of great transition in the way people are protecting themselves against HIV. We think this is a really exciting result and adds to a body of research that HIV is not passed on from a person with undetectable viral load, even with high rates of other sexually transmissible infections. In this study, we had rates of sexually transmitted infections of about 20% per year, and about 10% of men in this study of HIV negative men had the rectal sexually transmitted infections, which we're particularly concerned about as being cofactors in transmission. So our results suggest that in the presence of undetectable viral load, those STIs are no longer risk factors for transmission. Opposites Attract is only the second study to look at the treatment as prevention question in gay men. It's the largest in terms of couple years of follow-up and has provided the first data on this question from middle-income countries. In the broader picture, we now know there has never been a single recorded case of HIV transmission from an HIV positive person to their HIV negative partner when the HIV positive partner has undetectable viral load. And we think these findings really strongly support the hypothesis that condomless sex, when the viral load is undetectable, is a form of safe sex. Thank you.
So undetectable equals untransmittable, right? So I'm sure you're hearing that. If you haven't got the pin yet, you need to get one. So very nice. Thank you, Andrew. And obviously, we certainly had good data from HPTN of 5.2 in heterosexuals, but it's very nice to see this mounting data now for global application. And Thank you for that. Our final speaker is Catherine Oldenburg of the University of California, San Francisco, and we're going to move up the cascade now, recognizing that testing is so key to both treatment and prevention cascades. And she will share the results of a randomized controlled trial that's been conducted in Zambia and revealed an effective approach for increasing HIV testing amongst female sex workers. Catherine.
Thank you, Linda Gale. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to discuss these results on behalf of my co-authors and my collaborators in Zambia. The WHO recommends that female sex workers test for HIV every 3 months. But globally, the target for achieving that testing target has been we've been off of that target. So we conducted the Zambian Peer Educators for HIV Self-Testing Study, which was a 3-arm randomized controlled trial where we evaluated 3 different HIV testing approaches. Women were randomized either to a standard of care package where they were referred to conventional existing HIV testing services, or they were given an HIV self-test directly, an oral HIV self-test from a peer educator, or they were given a coupon which they could use to pick up an oral HIV self-test kit at an existing healthcare facility, which was a drugstore or a clinic. The HIV self-testing, we hypothesized, would be lead to increased HIV testing coverage because it may overcome some barriers to HIV testing that are common among female sex workers, which include inopportune clinic hours, stigma and discrimination from healthcare providers, and concerns related to confidentiality. The women we enrolled 965 women in the study. 1 in 5 of those women had never tested for HIV at all in their lifetimes. HIV self-testing was really, or HIV testing in general was really highly used. The self-tests were used by 95% of the participants who had access to them. And the women were given 2 HIV self-tests. So we evaluated HIV testing at 2 time points, 3 months apart. At the 1-month visit, which was approximately 1 month after the first HIV self-test distribution, 95% of the women who were directly given an HIV self-test reported that they had tested in the 1-month period prior. 84% of women who were given a coupon to collect the self-test kit at a fixed distribution point at a clinic or pharmacy reported picking up the test and using it. And 89% of women who were referred to standard testing reported testing for HIV. And so these were not statistically significant differences, with the exception of women who were directly given a self-test kit were 13% more likely to use the test kit than the women who were referred to an existing service. We also looked at repeat HIV testing. So we looked again at the 3 months later. We gave women a second HIV self-test kit or coupon, or the peer educators met again with the women in the standard of care arm and referred them again, and looked at whether or not women were testing at the 3-month interval. And again, HIV testing coverage was very high. About 80% of women reported testing in that 1-month interval at that point. And again, there were no differences in HIV testing coverage at that time point. Overall, we saw extraordinarily high rates of HIV testing. When we look at all of the women in aggregate over the 4-month period of the study, only a single woman out of 900 women who were retained at 4 months reported not testing for HIV at one point over the study. HIV self-testing specifically was very acceptable. People used it. We did have 3 reports of intimate partner violence related to HIV self-testing. I will note that this is a population that faces an extraordinarily high risk of intimate partner violence, and 60% of our women reported intimate partner violence in the past year at the baseline visit. So overall, HIV self-testing appears to be accessible, acceptable, and safe for women, for female sex workers in Zambia, and is an acceptable choice as an alternative HIV testing mechanism to improve regular HIV testing for this population. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. So that completes our studies for the morning in this press conference. We'll take questions from the floor. If you'd like to ask a question, as usual, please line up at the microphone. I'll call on you, state your name, your institution, and direct your question to the right person. Michael.
Thank you. Michael Smith, MedPage Today. My first question actually is for Dr. Landovich, and I just want to be clear that this study was essentially, you're looking at safety and PK. You have no idea whether the long-acting cabotegravir at either dose did anything to prevent HIV?
That's correct. The efficacy studies are, there's one that's in the field and there's another that's planned that will be deployed later this year, we hope. But that is absolutely correct. This was safety, tolerability, PK, not efficacy.
Okay. Super, that's great. And my second question is for Dr. Grulich. I wonder, can you put this study in context with HPTN 052 and Partners PrEP and all of the others? First of all, I guess a technical question. This is observational. How did you know that people had undetectable HIV? How are you finding that out?
So the first thing to say in comparison to HPTN 052 and studies like Partners PrEP, which are in heterosexuals, is that the data in gay men are much fewer. I mean, the only other study in this field prior to this had about 300 couples included. HPTN 052 had over 1,700 or something, I think, Mike, wasn't it? So, much bigger studies in heterosexuals. So the data have been far fewer. So all up now, there's about 650 gay couples followed for about 1,000 person years, but it's still not as much as in heterosexuals. I should say there's one larger study that's still in the field, which we'll report in the next year or two, the European Partner Study, and that will provide hopefully, greater certainty to the estimate around 0. Personally, I get a lot of I take a lot of comfort from the fact that even outside of these studies, there has never been a single case convincingly reported of a transmission from a person with undetectable viral load.
Okay, and within the study it's an observational study. There was no intervention involved.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did miss the second half of your question. They were attending clinics, and so they were undergoing the routine testing at those clinics. So in the analysis we're presenting today, we defined undetectable as a viral load count of less than 200, and that was recorded from their records. It wasn't self-report; it was recorded from the clinical records at the centres.
Does the cohort include any couples in which the HIV positive partner was in fact detectable above that level of 200 copies? And were there linked transmissions in that group?
It did contain a small number of people with detectable viral load. In fact, at baseline in Thailand, 40% of the men were not on treatment. They rapidly went on treatment when they joined the study. We did not detect any link transmission in those groups, but the number of couple years of follow-up in that group was very low. And in addition, in the Thai setting, condom use was pretty high. So, I can't emphasise too strongly that in this field, it's all about combination prevention. It's not just one or the other. And so the men in Thailand who had detectable viral load to start with were really good condom users. So we in the end, only had a couple of hundred acts of condomless anal intercourse. Remembering we had over 17,000 total up. We had about 200 that were between couples with detectable viral load, not protected by condoms.
Okay.
And we did not see transmission in that small number. And in that small number, it was mostly insertive sex. They were taking risk reduction in other ways. They weren't having receptive sex with ejaculation very, very much because they know that's the highest risk. They were avoiding that. So the number of risk episodes was low in those.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jérôme Martin, I'm covering the conference for YAG, a website for gay, lesbian, transgender people in France. My question is very general. You talked, Linda Gale, about a revolution in prevention, and that's really great. But what's the place now for condoms in the scientific studies and scientific research? Is there nothing more to investigate? We can all understand why it's so important here, PrEP, TASP, and so on. But for the scientific studies, is there nothing to investigate about condoms in social studies, in political issues, etc.?
Who would like to take that? Can we'll start with you, Andrew, and then maybe on the PrEP side, Jean-Michel and Rafi, if you want to also.
So I think there's two things to mention here. It's protection against HIV outside of the context of biomedical prevention and prevention against STIs. So we did see some new infections in our study, which were from outside partners. They were from men having condomless anal intercourse with outside partners. So clearly in non-monogamous couples, there's a real role for condom use or PrEP because they're both highly effective mechanisms to prevent HIV transmission. Then, of course, there's the issue of sexually transmitted infections. These other biomedical responses don't protect against STIs. So, in many settings, gay men will want to use gay men and heterosexuals will want to use condoms to protect themselves against other STIs.
Well, I think you're raising a good point, but in all of the PrEP studies, for example, I mean, the use of condom is closely monitored, and what we haven't seen yet is a striking change in behavior. And in PrEP study, you usually select people who do not use consistently condoms, and with the efficacy of PrEP, we see a slight increase in people having a lower use of condoms, but it's not like people just stopping using condoms. And with the high rate of STIs in these high-risk individuals, we encourage them to use condoms. And these, studies are ongoing. There are a number of sub-studies that are going to be analyzed in the next few months to see and to better analyze the behavior of people using PrEP. We are just at the beginning of this new preventive tool being implemented. So I can tell you that on the field, people are reconsidering also the benefit of condoms. Clearly, PrEP is a new tool, so you have a lot of interest about the new tool to prevent HIV. But when people realize that STIs are also a concern, then more and more people are using actually both condoms and PrEP. And so with monitoring these people, because the interest of PrEP is that you still see people on the long term every 3 months, and every 3 months you can provide counseling on HIV risk reduction and also STIs. And we hope that eventually, with combining all these preventive tools, condoms, PrEP, we might see not anymore an increase in STI, but potentially in these high-risk individuals a decrease, because we're going to do a better job in testing more frequently for STI, most of them being asymptomatic, and a better treatment of asymptomatic STIs, better partner notification. So eventually, it could be really a good thing to combine all these tools.
Do you want to
Yes, I think in our settings, especially in generalized hyperendemic situations, we completely continue to counsel and advocate condom use. And in fact, South Africa has the largest condom distribution country. But what we find is that only translates to about less than a third of people using the condoms. So again, despite us counseling condom use, we're also not sure in which acts they might also be used as well.
And maybe I'll just add that implicit within my comments was that condoms remain absolutely at the heart of what we're doing, and I would hope that research would not stop, because I think there's still much, certainly on the female condom side. I'd really love to see that continue to improve and get much more usable and more widely distributed, and understand who would use that kind of protection. So certainly this is not in any way a notion that we think condoms are no longer part of our prevention toolbox. So thank you for raising that. I'll go this side.
Ed Sussman, MedPage Today. Dr. Oldenburg, in your study, basically all three strategies worked pretty well. On the basis of what you found, is there any strategy that you would eliminate?
Strategy I'd eliminate. I think you're right. All three strategies worked really well, and we thought that was kind of a major win. That the HIV testing coverage that we saw was at both time points substantially higher than what we had hypothesized. And I think really what that underscores, like many other forms of prevention, is that choice is really important. And I think that I don't think that I would eliminate any of those strategies. There wasn't one strategy that really underperformed relative to the others. And I think that different strategies will work for different people moving forward. And I think that, as with all other prevention modalities that we're talking about, I think choice is important.
And access. I think,
Exactly,
I mean,
and
the other
access.
thing that screams to me is that these young women, presumably through this trial, had wonderful services, which, by the way, is really something we need to get to key pop. So
Yes.
that's
Yeah, so I
fantastic.
think that was, we worked with peer educators throughout for all women in all arms, they had access to a peer educator. And I think that we did not have a group that did not have a peer educator, so I don't have a control group for that. But I think that the working with those peer educators and having that social support network went a really long way for these women. And these are women who are in, it was 3 sites in Zambia that are all they're transit sites that don't have very many services for female sex workers specifically. And I really think that made a big difference for the successes we saw in the study.
And question on the IPERGAY study, Dr. Molina. This was more or less a post hoc analysis of your work. Do you need to have a specific clinical trial aimed at these people who have very few sexual contacts, or do you think your findings have enough weight now just to say that it's safe in that group?
Well, thank you for the question. I think these data, in addition to the PK data, in addition to the animal model data, I think we have enough now to be on the safe side among MSM. We're saying, and it was emphasized yesterday at the session, that for women in particular, we cannot recommend this dosing regimen yet because there are issues with PK in women that we need to address. So for men who have sex with men, I think the evidence now supports this dosing regimen, and we hope that not only in Europe but soon WHO and CDC would amend their guidelines to allow this dosing regimen for MSM.
Thanks, Jean-Michel. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Heather Berner with Medscape. Dr. Landowitz, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, were there any sex differences between women and men in terms of safety or metabolism or PK or anything?
Yeah, thank you for that. So in terms of safety, no, there were no differences by sex at birth in any of the safety signals, which was very reassuring, including injection site reactions, discontinuations. In PK, there are known differences between males and females for cabotegravir, and we're in the process of trying to fully understand them. I mean, the way cabotegravir works is the injection goes into a large muscle belly, in this case the gluteal muscle, which then serves as a reservoir for essentially seeding the blood plasma over time. And so we're trying to understand what governs the differences that are seen. Males at birth are certainly different from females at birth with regard to the pharmacokinetics of this drug. In the ECLAIR study, body mass index seemed to also be associated with it. In HPTN 077, we did not see a difference based on body mass index, but what is clear is the Ka, essentially the rate at which the drug seeps out of the muscle belly into the blood plasma is 50% slower in women than in men. So this makes for lower peak concentrations after the same dose and higher trough concentrations. And that's what I will present those data in detail in an hour or two, and you'll be able to see that. We're trying to fully understand that better, what governs that. It's not fully understood at this time. Right. I mean, what's reassuring is we can see the trough levels relative to these benchmarks in the non-human primate models. That's reassuring, but it's really only the phase 3 efficacy studies that will be confirmatory that these assumptions that we're making are correct about what are protective levels in humans, and we look forward to those data.
And just because I know you like to track the sort of numbers, and the numbers are bewildering. 083 is the study, HPTN 083 is the study Rafi mentioned in men who have sex with men, and HPTN 084 is coming and is a study in women who have sex with men.
Just to be 100% clear, 083 is cisgender men and transgender women who have sex with men, and 084 is cisgender women.
Thank you. Thank you.
Giulio Medicorelli from the Italian gay magazine Pride. Again, for the cabotegravir for PrEP, did you or are you planning to perform any kind of evaluation, qualitative evaluation has been done for the treatment study regarding how happy people are to take injections, or what are they suggesting and so on?
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. Yes, we've collected a large body of acceptability data for this. We haven't analyzed it yet. The study's actually still ongoing. Participants who are still in follow-up will complete study follow-up next summer. So that is something that's obviously critical to looking forward once if effectiveness is shown, if efficacy is shown, the ability to scale it up and anticipate its place in the toolbox. But that's critical, and we look forward to those data.
Which will be available after next summer?
Sometime in the scale of between now and next summer, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looks like everyone has had their questions answered for this morning. Thank you very much to all of you, and of course our panelists, and look forward to seeing the studies presented in detail. Thanks so much. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, never done anything like that.